Today I want to take another stab at tool time, the tool time question. And I want to try it a little bit different. Instead of laying it all out and talking about the arithmetic of it all, I just want to try to do it through comparison. Call it a then and now comparison, because maybe that's part of the problem. So as a preface to this, I don't really know very many people in the planning, scheduling, and turnaround control business that don't understand this, actually. I can go further than that and say from my own personal experience, 100% of the time, when I've ever been stuck trying to execute a turnaround with completely unrealistic tool time expectations, it has been dictated to the team from way up above. And that's what I would like to speak to today, right? Like, instead of doing the math and all, let's just imagine who that person on the strategy team is that is seeking to interfere with what the SMEs are telling them is true. So I picture that you're going to be talking about one or two people here. One of them will never have been out working on the iron ever, at all. And the second is going to be somebody more probably in my general vintage range. And that's the group we're going to use for the purpose of this particular chat, right? Like, let's just talk about, let's have that imaginary vice president who, let's say the conversation goes something like this: Pete, I don't care what you say, your contractors are having one over on you. You know, I get it that I haven't, I'm not out there out on the field like you are currently, but I've done my time out there, and I know that back in my day, we always were 80 to 90% on our tool time. And I'm going to agree with qualifications, right? I agree that if we're talking about doing turnaround back in the 80s, that we certainly had higher tool time ratios. Whether I believe that you were getting 80% or not, maybe one day we'll go out for ice cold beers and that'll be a great thing to discuss, because I find 80% to be a bit of a stretch no matter how I look at it. But, however, what I want to do today is just compare those two, right? Compare that vice president's memory with today's reality. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about 1981. In 1981, say, I remember clearly that tool time numbers would have been a great deal higher there, and I would have been writing permits for the crude and alky unit. I thought about using 1980, but the truth is 1980 was my first turnaround, and I spent all of it bewildered and most of it 3/4 terrified. So I was pretty satisfied just surviving that one. However, in 1981, I was a lot more acclimated to the environment, and I was the crude and alky operator issuing permits. So, to start with, we're going to have to be selective about the permit that we're going to use. We're going to pick a particular permit, and we're going to use that as our example. We're going to compare me writing that permit in 81 to me writing the permit in, say, 2020. And to do that, we're going to have to exclude a bunch of things. So we're going to not, nobody's going to come looking for a sour permit, because in 1981 we didn't have safe work procedures for sour protocols and all that kind of stuff. And nobody's going to come looking for a confined space permit, because that just puts it so we're not comparing apples to apples anymore, because confined space and sour work in 1981 and confined space and sour work in 2024 isn't really the same conversation. So let's say the job we're going to do, it's going to be in the crude unit, and we're going to have a Boilermaker team show up, and they're going to knock the heads off a set of exchangers and pull the bundles. So that's the job that we're looking at. So in 1981, I used to carry my permit book right here in my back pocket. And that wasn't anything special on my part. All the operators in that refinery carried their permit books in their back pocket. That was just how we did it back then. When you were taking over from your relief at the beginning of the day, they handed you your permit book, you put it in your pocket, and that's just how we did things. Of course, that tells you the if you're familiar with the modern permit book, you're smiling now because there's no way that's happening with a modern permit book. However, the reason I'm making a point of that is if this Imagine Boilermaker team showed up in my crude unit at the crack of 8 o'clock, right, to get a permit, let's stop there. Let's first recognize they could potentially have done that. Because in 1981, those guys would have rolled out of their car out in the parking lot, walked in, got their job assignment from their foreman, and walked over to the crude unit. Okay, so let's do this step by step. So let's get them to me first to get a permit. So in 1981, they rolled out of their car, they walked right to me, and they're in my crude unit at 8 o'clock. Okay, and I can easily issue a permit completely kosher and by the safety standards of the day in less than 5 minutes. It would always have been less than 5 minutes, especially for a job like this, which I would have already known they were coming for. So literally by 8:15 in 1981, my Boilermaker crew has impacts rattling. Okay, so we'll just leave them for now, and let's bring ourselves up to 2020. So in 2020, in the facility I'm thinking of, they had adopted by that time, somebody along lines discovered that if people stretch and warm up before they undertake strenuous work, that strains, sprains, and lost time injuries are dramatically reduced, and the company therefore saves large amounts of money. And I don't know much more about it than that because that's not my field of expertise. But nonetheless, that had been implemented, and it has been implemented in many, many places. I don't know that it's universal, but lots of places do that. The workday for those crews now starts with 10 to 15 minutes of calisthenics. Let's say 10 minutes, because let's say I'm cheap and I'm not going to stand for more than 10 minutes. Okay, so there's 10 minutes of calisthenics, and then they have a 5 to 15 minute toolbox safety meeting, and that I do know is universal. Everybody's doing that, and let's be realistic, it's always 15 minutes, usually more, so we're going to call it 15. So we're now at 8:25 when they get their work package and head off to the crude unit. So in 2020, the Boilermaker crew arrives to see me at 8:30. Okay? By that time, my 1981 crew has their first dollar plate on the ground and is hammering away on the second one. So when these guys arrive today, I'm going to start writing a permit. Now to make this part go quicker, I'm just going to tell you, in this particular facility that we're using as an example here, I did, when I was a turnaround manager, have this all walked through to make a point to both a vice president and a director. So you got a turnaround manager, a director, and a vice president watching while an operator issues a basic permit to maintenance crew team. So we can assume we're going to see best operator performance and best work team performance because the vice president is monitoring them. So 20 minutes was what it takes, and that ended up being the accepted number, and I can't dispute that. Very, very many permits took longer than that. Like I said, you had to be on your best game. So 20 minutes after they get there at 8:30, they've got a signed permit, and now they're all going to apply locks to their lotto board. And did I mention that part? In 1981, the crude unit we were turning around, we weren't doing lotto yet then. We weren't even using do not operate tags, to tell you the truth, right? It was basically a trust relationship, and you had to have a lot of trust in your operators back in that day. And so now they have their permit. Meanwhile, while we've been doing all this walkthrough, as a part of that 20 minutes, they've completed their FLHA and all the other protocols that didn't previously exist. So now they get out to the job site and pick up their impact wrench. Fairly, it's going to be 9 o'clock. So by 9 o'clock, my 1981 crew will have already dropped the dollars, the channels, and we'll be rigging in to pull bundles. So yes, I do agree with you that you probably did see much higher performance factor or tool time ratios in the time when you were out there. But that's not the time when the work's going to be done. The work's going to be done now. And it's going to be done to a bunch of protocols that have been issued to the workforce from senior leadership. And in a lot of places now, these safety protocols come with some pretty threatening language that basically spells it out. You will comply with this process to the letter or you won't be employed anymore. So that's a pretty effective threat. And you're not going to change much that 20-minute permit issuing time under those kind of circumstances. So I don't know if that helps. I mean, we're only talking about one small set of changes, but the long and the short of it is, you know, as a generic number, if I'm going in cold and I'm not going to do walk down, if you're scheduling more than 50% tool time, you're asking for a train wreck. You're scheduling a train wreck, literally. And my further advice to that, I do want to help people at the leadership level understand why it has to be what it has to be. But my bigger advice is, when in doubt, you really should trust your SMEs, because that's what they do. It's all they do. So I don't know if this is helpful for people or not, but you know, we're putting a lot of pressure on teams out there by making expectation statements that are just unreasonable and unachievable. So anyway, have a nice day, and talk to you next time.